Hi, everyone. Next up, I want to talk about what it means to do something better. And so, if we were in the classroom with the sound, I would play a little clip for you from the musical Annie Get Your Gun. And there is a song in that musical that you may know, Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better. And the two main characters, Annie Oakley, the sharpshooter, who is the sort of the main character, and then her sort of ultimate love interest, competitor turned. It's like one of those, like all of the Hallmark movies, right? There's some friction, and then it turns out differently. Frank Butler. And so they both are competing. They're saying, anything you can do, I can do better. And so I think about that as, part of the question, what does it mean to do something better? And they say some things in there that it might help us. So in the lyrics of the song, they say, I can get a partridge with a single cartridge. And then they said, the other person says, I can net a sparrow with a bow and arrow. And I think in either case, they're trying to say they can accomplish some ultimate task with fewer inputs, right? With less input, so they can do it more efficiently, that they can accomplish it, that they can accomplish the goal with fewer inputs. Similarly, they could use with the same inputs, one of them could produce more of it. What does it mean if you're better at wrapping presents than your sibling? I mean, you can do them faster, neater, less waste, something like that. And so one definition of better might be I can accomplish something with fewer inputs. So let's run with that and think about it for a minute. What if on a particular Saturday when it's not snowing, there are two things you could do? You could either plant trees or spread mulch. And not just you, two particular neighbors. So I have two neighbors in mind, and they're going to either plant trees or spread mulch. Right? And so on this table here, and you can pause this for a minute if you need to set up this table. I've got two neighbors, Bill and Hill, on the left. And then you're going to need four other columns. Two of them are filled in now, and we're going to fill in the other two in a little bit. So set up your table to look just like this, and then we'll continue. So the maximum number of trees that Bill can plant in a day is 10. And the maximum number of trees that Hill can plant in a day is 18. So who is better at planting trees? Well, probably most of us would say Hill is. And then the maximum number of yards of mulch that Bill can spread in a day is 15. And the maximum number of yards of mulch that Hill can spread in a day is 20. So if I said, who's better at spreading mulch? A lot of you would probably say Hill. Now, that is true if we are talking about absolute advantage. And so the definition of doing something better that I tried to pull from the musical, right, is basically that you can produce something with fewer resources than someone else. So that's consistent with absolute advantage. And if Hill has the absolute advantage in both spreading mulch and planting trees, then my next question is there any reason these two neighbors might want to trade? And we're not live, so I can't take your answers on that, but I'm going to assume that I've led some of you to say, I'm not so sure that makes sense, right? Hill is better at both, so why would she want to trade with Bill, who's inferior at planting trees and at spreading mulch? Okay, well, let's push on that, because ultimately we're going to see there is a reason they might want to trade. And it has to do with another definition of doing something better, and that is what we call comparative advantage. And comparative advantage says that you can do something at a lower opportunity cost than someone else. That you can complete something at a lower opportunity cost. And so those last two columns in the table, those are for opportunity cost. So the first one I've labeled the opportunity cost of planting one tree and the opportunity cost of spreading 1 yard of mulch. Now, there's a couple things I'm going to emphasize here. One is, before you even worry about the numbers, just concentrate on the units. In our example, there were only two things you could do. You could plant trees and you could spread mulch. So the opportunity cost of planting a tree is going to be some quantity of mulch given up. So the answer in terms of units will be to this top left box, opportunity cost of one tree, will be some quantity of mulch. So the question is, how much mulch spreading does one give up per tree planted? Mulch divided by trees. Right, the opportunity cost of one tree is going to be some quantity of mulch divided by some quantity of trees, and that gives you the opportunity cost per one tree. So it's basically 15 yards of mulch per 10 trees. So when you divide 15 by 10, you get 1.5. Right? So the opportunity cost of Bill of planting one tree is 1.5 cubic yards of mulch. Now this is a particularly awkward unit, but make sure you carry the units. So a correct answer for opportunity cost in a question like this will include the units. In fact, in a homework or a test problem, I would say be sure to include the units, right? And so that's it's not so subtle tip. Now, this next column, the opportunity cost for Bill of spreading 1 yard of mulch. So in a world with only two things to do on Saturday, planting trees and spreading mulch, then the opportunity cost of spreading mulch has to be planting some quantity of trees. So the answer will be some quantity of trees per mulch, trees given up per mulch. So it's going to be max trees, that's 10, divided by max mulch, that's 15. So you could reduce that to 2/3 of a tree. Now you can convert it to the decimal, it doesn't matter, just so you can compare it with hills ultimately. So, so Bill's opportunity cost of spreading a yard of mulch is 2/3 of a tree. And now that's a good philosophical question, right? What does it mean to plant 2/3 of a tree? Well, what we mean there is that you are 2/3 of the way done with the process of planting one tree in the time it takes Bill to spread a yard of mulch. So now let's do the same thing for Hill. You might want to pause it and just try this bottom line yourself, and then I'll continue and fill it in. Okay, so for Hill, the opportunity cost of planting a tree is going to be some quantity of mulch. Again, the answer is going to be mulch, and it's 20 over 18. So that's 10 over 9, let's say. Right? 10/9 of a cubic yard of mulch. And then Hill's opportunity cost of spreading a yard of mulch is going to be some quantity of trees, max trees divided by max mulch, 18 over 20. 18/20 is the same as 9/10 of a tree, right? Make sure you carry the units along. And so now, if comparative advantage means that you can do something at a lower opportunity cost, then we're going to compare up and down the columns, right? Look at the opportunity cost of planting one tree. Whose number is smaller, 1.5 or 1.9? Right? So basically, Hill has a lower opportunity cost, right? 1 and a little tiny bit more is less than 1.5. So Hill has the comparative advantage in planting trees, right? Because she can plant trees at a lower opportunity cost. And that's probably not a surprise to anyone, because Hill can plant a lot more trees than Bill can. Now, what about in the second column? The opportunity cost of spreading a yard of mulch. Bill can spread a yard of mulch in the time it takes him to get 2/3 of the way done planting a tree. And Hill can spread a yard of mulch in the time it takes her to get 9/10 of the way done planting a tree. So 2/3 is less than 9/10. So Bill has the comparative advantage in spreading mulch. So this may surprise us, right? Because Bill has the comparative advantage in spreading mulch, even though Hill has the absolute advantage in spreading mulch. And so that's why this lower opportunity cost language is so important. Now, just as a little tip, you should always work out the math completely, for each of the 4 boxes in a problem like this. But as a little check on your work, as you go across the row, look at Bill's opportunity cost for trees and mulch, they should be reciprocals, right? 1.5, I could have left that 3/2, right? 3/2 is the reciprocal of 2/3. And down below 10 over 9 is the reciprocal of 9 over 10. So my advice is always work them out and then just check your work by looking and making sure you have the reciprocals. If you if you get the same answer for both, you messed one of them up. If you're super confident in your work, you could figure out the first one and then just flip it and change the unit, and you'd be good to go. But that requires that you got the first one right. So if you mess that up, then you've automatically messed up both of them. So the other thing to think about, sort of check your work, is if one party has a comparative advantage in one thing, mathematically the other party will have a comparative advantage in the other. That's another little check on your work. So let's try one more, just to practice this. This one, I just pulled this picture off the internet as supposedly somebody's home brewing setup. This, in this case, we're going to have two neighbors. I called them President Rooney and Provost Raley. And I'm going to suppose, I'm totally making this up, that in their spare time, one of their hobbies is brewing beer. And they could brew either lager or stout, two different types of beer. And what we're going to suppose here is that President Rooney, in a given time period, with his hobby time, can make 5 gallons of lager, or he could make 10 gallons of stout, one or the other. Right? Those are basically endpoints on his PPF. And the provost, Dr. Raley, if he spent all of his hobby time making lager, he could make 4 gallons. And if he spent all of his hobby time making stout, he could make 3 gallons. So, who has the absolute advantage in producing lager? Well, absolute advantage just right means they can produce more than the other person. So 5 is greater than 4. So Rooney has the absolute advantage. And then what about with stout? Well, 10 is greater than 3. So Rooney has the absolute advantage in producing stout as well. So could they, I sort of gave it away. I should have held that down below the fold there. Is there any reason they might want to trade? Well, let's find the opportunity cost, and then we'll think about comparative advantage. So if Rooney is producing lager, the question is, how much stout does he give up for each gallon of lager? So the opportunity cost of a gallon of lager is going to be some quantity of stout. It's going to be stout per lager, right? Max stout over max lager, that's 10 over 5, or 2 gallons of stout. Right, the Rooney's opportunity cost of 1 gallon of lager is 2 gallons of stout, and I got that by dividing the max stout by the max lager. And similarly for Rooney, the opportunity cost of 1 gallon of stout is going to be some quantity of lager. How much lager does he give up per gallon of stout made? Lager divided by stout, that's 5 over 10, or 1/2 a gallon of lager. Right. And now, you might want to pause it and try the bottom line yourself. I will charge ahead. Opportunity cost of 1 gallon of lager. It's going to be some quantity of stout, right, for Dr. Raley. So that's stout, max stout, divided by lager. Max stout divided by lager, that's 3/4 of a gallon of stout. And opportunity cost for him of a gallon of stout is some quantity of lager per stout. Max lager divided by max stout, that's 4/3 of a gallon of lager. And now we ask this question, who has the comparative advantage? Well, the comparative advantage in producing lager is whoever can do it at a lower opportunity cost. So if you look in the lager column, the opportunity cost of lager, you've got 2 and you've got 3/4. Well, it turns out that 3/4 is smaller, right? So Dr. Raley can produce lager at a lower opportunity cost than Dr. Rooney. And for stout, if you look in the stout column, Rooney's opportunity cost of stout is 1/2 a gallon of lager. Raley's opportunity cost of stout is 1 1/3 gallons of lager, right? 4/3. So 1/2 is less. So remember, we checked their reciprocals, and then there is a different person has a comparative advantage for each. So this comparative advantage thing is a little bit different, right? It's a little bit surprising. But what it really means is it's a comparative thing. Who is less bad at doing something? So Rooney can outproduce Rayleigh in terms of lager and in terms of stout. But when you think about their opportunity cost, President Rooney has a lower opportunity cost for stout, and Rayleigh has a lower opportunity cost for lager. So even though Rayleigh can't produce as much lager or as much stout, he's less bad at producing lager. And so if you look at the numbers for lager, the maximum outputs 4 to 5, that's much closer than 3 and 10. Right? So basically, even though Rooney has the absolute advantage in both, the Rayleigh's less bad at producing lager, and so there might be an advantage to him specializing in lager. So that's what we're going to think about next. I'm going to draw 2 PPFs for you. One for Rooney and one for Rayleigh. And on this axis, we'll put lager. And on this axis, we'll put stout. And we'll translate this table into a PPF. So for President Rooney, his max output of lager is 5 gallons. Right, so one endpoint on his PPF is 5. His maximum output of stout is 10. And we'll just assume constant marginal opportunity cost and draw in a straight line, and we'll call this his PPF. Right, where the endpoints are 5 and 10, his maximum outputs of either. Now, for Dr. Rayleigh, right, his maximum outputs are 4 and 3. So if we try to keep the same scale, if that's 5, then 4 would be right about here. Let's get it on the line there. And then stout, this was 10, right? So that makes this 5. So 3 is going to be in about here, right? My dot is not in the right place. Let me see if I can fix that. There we go. So right now we have a PPF for each of them based on the data in this table. So here's the fun, surprising conclusion. Suppose they trade 3 gallons even Steven, right, at a ratio of 1 to 1. Now, if we produce the thing in which you have a comparative advantage, Rooney is going to produce which one? Well, if you look in the table, Rooney has a comparative advantage in producing stout. So Rooney is going to produce here, right? And he's going to have 10 gallons of stout and 0 gallons of lager. And President Rayleigh, or Provost Rayleigh, is going to, if you look at the table on the bottom row, he has a comparative advantage in producing lager. And so if he specializes in producing the thing in which he has a comparative advantage, he will be at the end of his PPF and he will produce 4 gallons of lager. Now, I said, suppose they trade 3 gallons even up. So if Rooney trades away 3 gallons of stout, if he made 10 gallons and he trades away 3 gallons, so there's the middle, there's kind of 5, he has how many left? This is tough math, right? He's going to have 7 gallons of stout left because he's trading away 3. But what does he get in return? He gets 3 gallons of lager. And so if that's 5, then this is 2.5. So 3 is going to be kind of up here. Right, so this, the pink dot, is where he is after trade. So if he produces at 10 gallons of stout and then he trades away 3 of them, but gains 3 of these, he's going to end up at that pink dot. So does trade make President Rooney better off? Well, yeah, he can consume outside of the PPF. He can consume a combination of lager and stout that he cannot produce for himself. And that's a pretty cool thing. But if this trade makes Rooney better off, what do you think it does for Rayleigh? Well, let's see. Rayleigh only made 4 gallons of lager, and he's going to trade 3 of them away. So how many does he have left? Just 1 gallon. But he's going to have, well, how many gallons of stout? 3. It looks like it's on the line, but it's not. This is where my graph is a little. See if we can. Right, this comes over. Oops, that was, oh boy. Oh wait, where's the return thing? Here we go. Put it back. That's it. So I'm trying to show, right, if this dot is at 3, I guess I accidentally erased that. If this is 3 gallons of stout, on his PPF, he can have 3 gallons of stout if he has absolutely no lager. After trade, he can have 3 gallons of stout and 1 gallon of lager, which is technically outside of his PPF. So even though my graph is a little bit sloppy, I hope you can see, right, the takeaway, and that's what I've put down here. Specialization and trade allow people to consume outside of their PPF. And this is the use of comparative advantage, right, in this table and the use of the PPF to show that. And I think that's a pretty exciting takeaway. Now, if we think about it a little bit more, it's really not maybe all that surprising. And let me just give you sort of the story to go along with it. You know, do you want to be Robinson Crusoe? Well, or the modern example, do you want to be Tom Hanks stranded on the island with just Wilson volleyball? Right? Was that Castaway? I think. Does anybody recognize this house? This is not mine. Right? This is George Eastman's house. It's on East Avenue down in the city. It's beautiful. George Eastman founded Kodak. It was very successful, right? Doing that, had a very large house for himself. Beautiful. It's the Eastman, house and museum. You can tour it. It's really cool. Could any of you build a house like this? I'm going to say no, probably not. Now, could any of you build a house like this? Here's a simpler, stick-built, modest ranch house. And this one, maybe some of you are like, well, maybe, with my extended family, we could do something like this. We've built, put an addition on or build a house or build a garage or something, and we could swing that. So yeah, maybe you could. I don't think I could, but I'm not completely unhandy, but this is beyond the scope of I know my limits. But the thing is, even if you're building this, you're not actually building it yourself from the ground up, right? You start by calling the excavator, and the excavator comes and digs the foundation hole, right? And then the cement truck comes and you pour the footers. Now you may build the forms, right? And but then you pour the footers, and then the block company comes. A week later, the block company comes and delivers the block, and then you buy bags of mortar and you mix that up and you lay however many courses of blocks, and then the lumber company shows up and they deliver all of the floor joists and all the 2x6s or whatever you're framing with. And then you get windows delivered, and you're going to get siding and insulation and carpet and plumbing, and right. So even though if you build it yourself, you're actually still trading for pretty much every component that goes into it. And so my fear is if we were Robinson Crusoe, right, we could not build this house, right? And we could not even build this house. My fear is that if we were on a deserted island trying to fend for ourselves completely, that we would live in something that looks more like this. And that's the takeaway. Think about our housing, our clothing, the food we enjoy. Can you grow your own food? Well, maybe. Right? Some of you might come from families that had a nice garden and had a lot of produce in the summer. That's awesome. I grew up that way too. But we bought the seeds and we used tools that we bought, and there's a lot of trade that still goes into having a productive garden, and that certainly doesn't get us bananas or strawberries in the middle of winter, or a lot of other wonderful things that we can enjoy from Wegmans, let alone all of the semi-prepared food that we just have to take home and heat up. So if you think about our standard of living, what about your smartphone? What about all of your technology? So your shoes, your clothes, your housing, your food, transportation, all of that. we're consuming outside of our ppf. If we had to make that for ourselves, it would be pretty crude and not very comfortable. So anyway, generally speaking, trade makes us better off. All right, that's the takeaway for this. You guys take care, and we'll